And I assume because the guest posts you wrote for middlegradeninja.com have been the most influential bits of marketing you've ever done, you probably already have this guest post memorized off the top of your head. But just in case, I will remind you of some of these steps, and then I'm just going to set you up and hear your thoughts on these. So this is your 10-step guide for writing scary thrillers for kids. And step number 1 is put the kids in charge. How do you put the kids in charge?
Well, you want to have them start their journey with whatever event is going to thrust them into that new world that they're heading on. And the adults need to be on the outside. So if the parents are in the picture, or the aunt or the uncle, have them be on the outskirts, right? Because kids don't want to read stories about things that are happening to grown-ups. So, and my critique partner is always reminding me of this. So when we're swapping our manuscripts, he'll often say, oh, you've got too much grown-up backstory here. We don't want to know about that. And so it's a reminder for me, oh, you're right. Kids don't want to read about that. So make it short and sweet. Have the kids on the adventures, navigating through their journey on their own and making their own decisions on how to come up with solutions, right, to problems they have.
How much is too much? When do you know it's time to cut back on the adults doing things?
I think if they start to take over the scene, right? So even if you have a book that's middle grade and you have your main character, say, who's 12 years old, we don't want a scene that's just about grown-ups talking, right, off to the side. So that child character has to be really the center of the focus, unless they're overhearing a conversation. And then you don't want that to go on too long, because you just don't want the focus to be on the grown-ups, you know? On the other hand, grown-ups in a child's life are very important, right? There's family, there's that safety, that security, that comfort that comes with family. So that is a part of their world and who they are and the decisions they make. That's fine, right? But we don't want the grown-ups making decisions for them that are like changing their journey, or we want to see them going through their transformation, right? And have their growth and make decisions, whether they're good or bad, and deal with those consequences.
Makes 100% sense. Okay, so step number 2 is kids are in charge, which leads into have the kids figure out how to take the bad guys down, not the grown-ups. Any exceptions to that?
Well, I think sometimes kids need advice. So, you know, maybe they might look to an older person, an aunt, a sibling, a parent for advice, but then ultimately they have to take that advice and then make their own decision, right, with what they're going to do. And especially if it's like with another friend who's a young child as well. They maybe can take that advice, but then decide how they're going to move forward on their own.
So do we have to put in some kind of reason why, you know, they've spotted our villain, the child can't just call the cops?
Well, they can, but then the story might be over really quick. Right? You need to throw more obstacles in their way so they get through one obstacle and then get to another and then get to another so they can ultimately reach their end goal. Absolutely. So, yeah, I guess with each scene, you kind of have to think, you know, what is it that this character wants? And what is it that's standing in their way from getting this? And how are they going to get it?
Step number 3 is whatever scary situations they find themselves in. Do you know how to? No, I'm teasing. They must navigate their way out. Any exceptions to that rule?
I don't really think so. I mean, we want to see the kids get themselves out of these situations, you know, and because here's a really key thing with writing for children, right? When we write for children, it's hard not to think about ourselves, but we really have to think about the reader. And these kids really become these characters, right? They're going on these adventures. They're the ones who are making these choices and navigating through all these obstacles and ending on these cliffhangers and what's going to happen next. So they're putting themselves in these character shoes so much more, I think, than grown-ups do. That's why kids love series, because they fall in love with these characters. They become these characters. They are experiencing life through them, which maybe they haven't experienced so much of, right, so far in their life at 10 years old or 12. So, yeah. Always ask yourself that. I think use that as a guide. You know, is the character making a decision, or is there some other grown-up or adult in the way that's stopping them from moving on in the story?
Makes sense to me. Number 4 is don't dwell on dark stuff. Make it happen fast without gory detail. How dark is too dark? What gory details are off limits, or what's appropriate for middle grade?
Yeah, it's tough because I mean, middle grade horror is really popular right, now, right? And R.L. Stine has been, with Goosebumps. I mean, that's basically middle grade horror too. So I think it really just depends. I mean, your readers for middle grade are going to be 8 to 12, okay? So you want to be mindful of the gore. Young adult, that's a whole different realm, as far as the boundaries that you can break. But yeah, don't dwell on the dark stuff too much. Move on from that. Adding a dash of humor always helps as well with kids and having their friends along the way. So that's just my rule of thumb. Don't dwell on the dark stuff too much with middle grade, because here's the thing to remember with middle graders. They live their life in the moment, right? With young adult and with teenagers, they become more reflective. They internalize more. It's really about them, their world. They're very self-absorbed. But middle graders are in the moment, where teenagers are thinking maybe ahead of the future or long term or coming down the road. So with middle grade, when it's right in the moment, right? You're in that moment, you have that horrible situation, and then boom, you get out of it and you're on to the next moment.
What about delicious, gross details? Like I know, as a middle grade child, if I saw a dead animal in the park, it was getting poked with a stick. That was definitely going to be part of the day. Is there any stick poking that you're allowed to incorporate, or no? Save that for real life.
No, that's totally the fun stuff. Oh, hey, you know what? I can quickly give you an example here of something gross. Because I actually use this in my school visit. So this is from Joshua and the Lightning Road, because like I totally should have been a 10-year-old boy in another life, because I love toilet humor and boy humor. One of my favorite series that I used to read with my son was Captain Underpants. That was hilarious. So anyway, so this is this little scene. It's just like a paragraph that I read to kids when I'm trying to teach them about show versus tell. Like instead of telling that, oh, a guy picked his nose and threw a booger on the floor, don't just tell us that, show us, right? Like this, okay? Here we go. Let's see. He scratched his bumpy half nose, snaking his eyebrow in concentration. Then he stuck a sausage finger up the good side of it and rooted around to pull out a green glob and flick it at me. It landed at my feet with a wet slap. Ew, right?
Beautiful.
That was so fun to write. So yes, poke that dead animal, but we don't need to get, 2 paragraphs of disgusting, gory detail on it. So just give us the fun part of it. Is it squishy? Is it mushy? Does it smell?
Tip number 5 is give them friends in their travels. Life is hard without friends, and a kid needs friends to help them along a scary adventure. What type of character makes a good friend character?
Well, I think sidekicks, as I like to call them, definitely not the same kind of character as your main character, right? You want a character that's going to balance them out. So otherwise, you don't really need that sidekick if they're basically the same kind of character as your main character. So like, for instance, in Unicorn Island, I have Sam, who's adventurous, who is risky and rebellious, oftentimes doesn't think before she does something. Her friend Tuck is more scientific. He's cautious. He's got all these facts and figures in his head. They each balance each other out and bring their own strengths to their journey and adventure that they have. So something writers can do is to research sidekick characters. There's all kinds of blog posts and books on these to kind of see the formula of different characters, whether they're a mentor or like a best buddy or a hero or a watcher, maybe somebody who just observes. So there's all different kinds of sidekick characters that you can use to balance out your main character.
Number 6, true story events have the kids discover their own strength and courage to overcome bad things happening to them. Pretty self-explanatory. Any tips on that, on showing kids discovering their own strength?
Well, I think when you're writing your scenes, so like for each chapter, you want to have that guide of how, what is happening to this character in the chapter, how is it affecting them internally as well as externally. So basically, my little guide is, what is happening in the scene that everybody can see? Like, oh, the top of the volcano blew off. We all need to run, right? But what's going on internally in your main character? Like, oh, the top blew off, but my best friend is at the top and nobody knows it. I have to go get them, or my mother died in a volcano and I can't have this happen to my best friend. So show what's going on internally in that character as well as externally. so that we can see them move along in the story. And they have to have their own self-aware transformation on their own, right? So we don't want like an adult to give them an idea of like, oh, you know, how they're changing maybe with their grief or their friendship. We need to see that happen inside that young character on their own, through their own choices.
I love this backstory for this Batman type character you created, but for volcanoes. Ever since a volcano killed my mother, I've sworn revenge. I'll never let a volcano hurt another person.
Well, it's funny because I actually, speaking of volcanoes, as a side story here, I used to have serial nightmares as a kid. I had very vivid nightmares, and I still have my journals of them all. But one serial nightmare I had was of lava chasing me down hills, down mountains. It was under the snow. I would fall through into the lava. I was constantly running away from lava. I don't know why.
Well, if you get some time, I believe there's a game show on Netflix that the fam and I watched a couple episodes of. The floor is lava, where it's, you know, just like kids jumping on couches and different things trying to stay above. It's not actual lava, but
right.
That's the whole game show. So you watch that, you get some tips. You don't have to worry anymore. You're going to know what to do.
I guess so. Yeah. My other nightmare was the machete man. He would chase me with his machete to try and cut off my head. That was not fun. Mm.
What if the machete was made of lava? Then you'd really be in trouble. Oh my
Yes.
goodness.
However, after many years, the machete man was put to peace. I all of a sudden had people come in my dream. They whipped him with garden hoses, and he disappeared and never came back.
Huh.
So they took the machete man down.
That's very curious.
Crazy writer imagination, right?
Has the machete man been replaced by a new boogeyman, or nope, that was it?
No. I stopped having nightmares a long time ago. Thank goodness.
Let's see. Where did we leave off? We were talking about number 7, make all seem lost. In the chapters on cliffhangers to encourage kids to want to keep turning the pages and find out what happens next. How do we make all seem lost, and what's a good cliffhanger to end on?
Well, all seems lost means, oh my gosh, so they're trying to get this one goal, but then boom, you throw this obstacle in their way, and it's like, how, my gosh, they're never going to get over there. How are they going to do that now, right? This is broken, or that's broken, or the path is washed away. You know, or the tire is flat on the vehicle that they're hiding out in the back. So those are fun things. Throw obstacles in your character's way, and that will make things seem all lost along the way. Ending on cliffhangers, that's a super fun way to kind of lead into the next chapter. And how I look at each chapter, writing for kids, I look at each chapter as its own short story. So I kind of look at it as a beginning, a middle, and an end, and then opening the door for the next part, the next story to come, right? So that's how I kind of look at my chapters.
Tip number 8 is have it work out in the end. Why?
Because ultimately, kids want their characters to succeed. They want to know, you know, when we first start writing a story, and I've always kept this in my head, in that first page, whether you're writing for adults or for kids, you're pointing that arrow to the end of that story. So from that first page, we as the reader know, oh, this is where it's going, okay? You know, we have that general kind of idea. And so kids want that. They want their characters to be all right, to succeed, and leave the door open, right? Possibly to another story. Maybe not everything works out in the end. That's true. You can't have everything perfect and wonderful in the end, you know, utopia. But some things might not work out, but maybe they work out in a different way that's just as satisfactory.
What kind of things are acceptable to have not work out?
I think characters, maybe they have their misbelief. Like, for instance, maybe a young character thinks I was responsible for my mom's death, and that's why my dad doesn't like me, right? And so maybe at the end, she realizes, wow, I wasn't responsible for my mom's death, and my dad still doesn't like me, but it's for a different reason, you know? I mean, that's probably not a really good example, but yeah, it's almost like if they start out with their own misbelief, and then that changes and transforms throughout the book, maybe they come to a conclusion at the end that the thing that they always wanted really isn't the best thing for them, and it really was something else. So, like, for example, in the one book that I'm writing right now, I'm actually revising it to get to my agent hopefully in another month. It's a contemporary middle grade, And the young girl, the character, again, thinks her dad doesn't want to be with her because her mom is dead, and she's not enough for him. And she doesn't see that he's trying to connect to her, and she thinks he's dating this other woman, but he's really not. He's trying to connect to his daughter through this other woman. And so at the end, you know, she kind of sees, maybe it's not so bad. Dad needs a friend too, right? We can both be friends with her. So, which is something she never thought she would ever think. So it turns out different, but it's satisfactory for her.
Let's see. Number 9, add humor. Interjecting a dollop of funny can alleviate the tension in the scariest of scenes and lighten the moment. So when is that not a good idea? Are there any scenes where we want to keep that suspense, ratchet it up, and not relieve it? Or because it's middle grade, do we want to keep it fun and it's Bunnicula, it's not a real vampire, you're going to be okay?
Well, I think you can leave it tense, especially if it's the end of a chapter and you want that cliffhanger to go into the next chapter. But it always helps to have as like a sidekick character who maybe has that witty sense of humor and always says the wrong thing at the wrong time, to make everybody see things in a different light. That can really break it up, because if it's too heavy for too long, again, this isn't going to be an adult thriller, right? You don't want to weigh down on the dark and the gray so much with the middle grade. It's too heavy. And I'll give you kind of an example of this. My one book that was on submission a couple years ago, it had grief in it, and I was told it was too sad, right? So I needed to, and this is a middle grade, so I needed to lighten it up and to add other elements into the story with the character that weren't so sad, give her more of a purpose in another area, so we weren't focusing so much on her grief,
Tip number 10 is make it a series. Which I think is always a good idea. Who doesn't want to get paid more? But when is that not appropriate? When I'm assuming it's happened to you that you've had a story that, no, this is self-contained. Let's leave it be. And how do you know when that's the case versus, we can milk this thing a little more?
Well, I always look at every story as being self-contained, because we want it to have that complete beginning, middle, and end, that satisfying, conclusion. And there's always a door that can be opened, I think, for a series. Now, I like to tell writers, if you're pitching to get an agent, and, because I hear this a lot, oh, I've written a 3-book, I've written a trilogy, or I've written a 2-book series. I always recommend pitching with your 1 book. It needs to be a standalone, right? Even though it's going to be a series, and just pitch it with series potential. I wrote this book, XYZ, for middle grade, 50,000 words, and it has series potential. That's all you need to say. Because really you don't want to go write that 2nd or 3rd book until you sell it, if that's the route that you're going, right? With trying to get an agent and go traditional. Otherwise, it's fine if you're going to self-publish. But yeah, so for example, I didn't know if Unicorn Island was going to have a 2nd book, but they wanted to leave a little thing at the end just in case. So I did, and I moved on into that. My Joshua books, the same thing. I satisfying conclusion, but left the door open as well for a series. So I think any standalone book can be a series if you want it to be. I never thought my first book, A Human Element, was going to be a series, until all of a sudden, boom, this idea came for the 2nd book, and boom, the idea came for the 3rd book, and then it became a trilogy. So yeah, sometimes you just can't let those characters go, And so if you're going to be traditionally published, sometimes you have to wait for that editor or that publisher to give you the go-ahead for book 2. You may get a 2-book deal right off the bat, or a 3-book deal, or just 1-book deal. So focus on that 1 book, make it a standalone, but leave it open, a little bit for there to be other stories.
And that is writing scary stories for children.